Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aria Verliner, and I'm the staff lead for the Electric Bicycle Incentives Project. Today, we'll be discussing project goals and then having an open discussion. We'll then wrap up with some next steps. First, though, I'd like to provide some background. In the 2021-22 state budget, CARB was appropriated $10 million to establish the Electric Bicycle Incentives Project to provide financial incentives for purchasing electric bikes. Up to 10% of those funds can be used to support safety education programs. The project needs to be established no later than July 1st, 2022, and we are able to provide incentives for different types of e-bikes. On August 30th, 2021, we held our first electric bicycle incentives project work group. There were over 130 participants who provided more than 150 very detailed comments with CARB through the question and answer box covering every aspect of the program. This in addition to the lively and informative 2-hour discussion. This is in addition to the 2-hour discussion. Given the number of comments that were shared with CARB, we thought it would be a good idea to make those comments publicly available. They were grouped by category and anonymized. For those who are interested in viewing those comments, please visit our website, which Andrea will drop in the chat box. As I move on to discussing project goals, I want to let everyone know that this work group is being recorded, but there are no slides today. This is the first time we are recording a public work group, so please bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties or bumps or anything like that. Lisa, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. Their last work group that we held, we did have questions about some of the logistics with regard to the chat box and the Q&A. So a quick update on that. For today's work group, we have disabled the chat just so we only have one place to monitor public comments coming in. But the Q&A box has been updated to allow you to place your comment or your question and others can see it immediately. That way, hopefully we can alleviate too many of the same comments back and forth. You will also have the option to include an upvote, which will allow you to move your comment up to the top of the line. You can only do that once with each comment. But it allows you to raise something if we're in the middle of a conversation that your question pertains to, so that I can hopefully catch it as we're going through that component of the questions. And then finally, if you are a reporter and there's something interesting that you have found through this work group and would like to use a direct quote, we do ask that you please reach out to our Office of Communications. If you don't already work closely with them, you can connect with Aria or I, and we'd be happy to put you in touch with that staff.
Thanks, Lisa. I actually see a question in the Q&A box from Toshi. Will the recording be made publicly available? So that is the hope. We are doing this for the first time, and so we need to, once this webinar has been recorded and we get back from Zoom, we need to do some work with that, and we need to talk to our IT department to see how we can make this recording publicly available. But that is the goal.
And one other really quick, sorry, Aria, from Mark Roos, that he comments that there isn't a camera for the audience. Unfortunately, that is one of those things that I was not available when we set up the webcast. And so hopefully for next time around, we'll have all of the bugs worked out. But as of right now, I don't believe that participants are able to use a camera function. So it'll just be Aria and I on camera today. And
Patty, there is a link. We will get you a link to provide some background info on the project. The summary of public comments received from the first work group that Andrea posted is actually a really good tool. But if you visit our website, which Andrea will post in the chat box soon, you'll be able to see some of the other work that's been done on this. Thank you. Okay. Moving on. I do want to remind everyone that we are at the very beginning stages of developing this project. So just please keep that in mind. Moving on to project goals. Based on the feedback we received and CARB's continued dedication to increasing equity, the main goal of this project is to advance equity. In the first work group, CARB received a lot of feedback and interest in reaching underserved communities, such as priority populations, low-income individuals, rural communities, communities of color, and disadvantaged communities. The second goal of this project, but just as important, is to reduce VMT. Higher e-bike adoption and trips will displace car trips, thereby reducing VMT. While there are many different goals we could set for this project, we thought it best to start simple with these two goals, but as always, we welcome your feedback. Does anyone have any comments or would like to provide some feedback on the goals I just discussed? I know we didn't discuss project concepts this time, but we are open to hearing your thoughts. With that, Andrea, let's open up to questions and comments. For those of you joining on the web platform, please raise your hand using the raise hand feature. For those of you joining by phone, press pound or #2 to raise your hand. When you're called on, please state your name and affiliation. And if you don't have an affiliation, if you're just calling in as yourself, just say you're calling in as yourself. So yeah, with that, Andrea, let's open it up.
All right, we have one raised hand at this time. Mark, I am unmuting your line. Just a reminder to please state your name and affiliation.
Mark, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I must have hit it twice by accident instead of once.
There
I'm
you
Mark
go.
Roos with Sustainable Energy Inc. And we are a primarily at the moment battery and solar thin film startup. We have plans to it's a ceramic semiconductor technology, which is very different from lithium batteries, very different from today's solar thin film and solar panels, disruptively beyond them. So we're looking at 3 to 7 times the capacity of lithium batteries and twice the efficiency of the very best panels commercially available today. Also suitable for space, also suitable for aircraft. Getting down to bicycles, I submitted this question: can we talk about my design for the active transit stack over group rapid transit made with advanced composites? Originally, I came up with this when the Dumbarton Bridge community meetings were being held for the Dumbarton Rail Corridor and Dumbarton Bridge, Rail Bridge. So the idea was above the bidirectional heavy rail, we'd have bidirectional group rapid transit, and above that, we'd have fast and slow bicycle lanes, and above that, we'd have pedestrian and miscellaneous mobility device lanes, and above that, we'd have a solar canopy. Of course, our solar canopy would be 48% efficient, meaning half a kilowatt per square meter, and it would power the group rapid transit. This would make it possible for people on electric bicycles to actually ride their bicycles across the bay and to their work sites. It would make it possible for group rapid transit to collect people and take them to the transit center, the Redwood City Transit Center. And that could be the start of a whole new industry in the Bay Area. So I know the guy who developed this and has the tooling for coaches in his farm in Texas. But he was the leader for 45 years. He was the leader of the advanced vehicle design consulting industry in Southern California. And also I worked for 10 years with the inventor of the Bosch captive column, with Larry Bosch, the inventor of the captive column structural geometry. And that's the ultimate high strength, lightweight structural geometry. And I'm also consulting for the people who have North American distribution rights for the best ultra high performance concrete. These are people that were with the firm, with the guy who invented it in the first place by redesigning, by reverse engineering the Roman concrete that was used to make the Pantheon and the underwater wharves and the aqueducts that are still standing 2,000 years later. So what basically the upshot is that we can make these structures very light, very inexpensive, and we can install them at night with a portable crane. So it eliminates the issues of disruption. It eliminates the 2 years construction periods. Like for the bicycle lane that crosses the Bayshore Freeway in San Carlos, Belmont area, it took them over a year to build that thing. That's unnecessary and it's way too expensive. So what I'm wanting to do also is get people above the stoplights. When I was a kid, when I was in 6th grade, I started commuting 2 miles to school on a bicycle, and I would simply turn onto the other street and then make a U-turn and go back to avoid stopping, because of the loss of momentum on the bicycle would tire me out getting where I needed to go. So that's the lesson I brought forward, in the idea of being above the traffic, above all the stoplights and stop signs, able to continue free. The other things are that you're up above the building, the lower buildings. You can see the mountains around you. You can see the tree canopy, the canopy of the urban forest. So it helps break what we've done to ourselves by creating the urban canyons. It helps us get up, get a sense of freedom and get above the smog, the worst of the air pollution, and get above the issues of safety, so that there's no way that a car can run into you when you're 30 feet above them. Okay. And the issue of safety is the primary issue that's been holding back the adoption of active transportation and bicycling. So I've been looking at, I know that we can be far less expensive than pedestrian bicycle bridges are today. And I know that we can do it by using mushroom foundations. We can avoid interfering with utilities, where the bending moment for like the centrifugal forces on a curve are too great. We can use soil nails out from those mushroom foundations, and it can be all integrated with the ultra high performance concrete and basalt fiber. So, I'm definitely very knowledgeable about all the technologies involved in this.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. I really appreciate the interest and the very unique ideas that you have. I think the challenge with this funding is that we are really focused on the funding going towards specific vehicle incentives. And so this funding is not intended to support necessarily a particular system design. Well, I think your concept has a lot of merit. I think that's something that I would really encourage you to work with local government in San Francisco in particular, other area or the urban areas that could benefit from a program like that. But this is really intended to be a bike purchase incentive to help consumers make the choice to move towards using an electric bike.
Okay, so you're not getting into infrastructure for bicycles yet?
No, not at all. I mean, other than maybe potentially individual charging spots, say at the local grocery store that can help support, or if there happens to be a bike share component, which we're not sure yet, but no, not that type of infrastructure.
Oh, okay, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please pass this on to the other folks.
Sure, will do. Thanks, Mark.
There are no raised hands at this time. Oh, one raised hand. All right, Jonathan, I will unmute your line.
Hey, good morning. Jonathan Changus with the Center for Sustainable Energy. And I was curious if there's kind of a larger picture, either in kind of the scoping plan or in other spaces where CARB has kind of a bigger picture for e-bicycles. Is there a bigger piece in how that might inform kind of this incentive program design? Is how does it fit in with kind of larger sectoral approach? Or is that something that we're encouraged to help kind of submit comments on, is the role of e-bicycles in a bigger space, not just within this $10 million initial program, but how does that maybe signal a a potential role for bicycles in a bigger way?
Thanks, Jonathan. So it's actually both. This is what this work group is about, and this is what the series of work groups will be about, is getting feedback from the public, from stakeholders on, how we can design this program, and then also looking internally at CARB to see how we can sort of support other programs or work with other programs that provide infrastructure for e-bikes or shared e-bikes. Does that answer your question?
I know, I really appreciate that. And thinking through, what types of vehicles or bikes should be eligible, class 1, class 2, class 3. I mean, there's questions about, trying to really achieve some reductions from the commercial space where class 3 and cargo e-bikes could really deliver and be a vehicle replacement versus really trying to help the equity space and folks that can't afford a vehicle, but for which an electric bicycle could be a real meaningful asset and resource for them to help them get to work, get to school, just kind of go about their business. Those are very different kind of motives and objectives. So $10 million is only going to go so far. So it's really helpful to think about who do we want to prioritize first, and how does that fit in with the bigger picture of all the wonderful things y'all are doing to try and decarbonize transportation. So that was really helpful that we have some freedom to kind of think big picture and recognize $10 million will only go so far. So thank you, that was very helpful.
Thank you, Jonathan. As we're waiting for more people to raise their hands, I just sort of want to give some questions, some food for thought, maybe to spark some more conversation. The two goals that we have, advancing equity and reducing VMT, are these the right goals that we should have while developing this program? What would be a good way to measure progress towards these goals? Does anyone have any suggestions, or does anyone have any metrics that they would use, that they've seen used in prior programs? Because I know that there have been local programs all throughout the state that incentivize e-bikes, but I'm not sure if any metrics have been collected on that and what the goals were with those specific projects.
All right, we are getting several more raised hands. So the first raised hand is Dylan. Dylan, I am unmuting your line. You may have to unmute yourself as well, and just a reminder to please state your name and affiliation.
Great, thank you. Dylan Fitch, UC Davis. Just responding to Aria's question about goals. So first I would offer an idea of broadening the reducing VMT goal to a parallel goal of just increasing bicycling for two reasons. One, it's easier to measure, and two, it has a lot of other co-benefits, health and all kinds of other things. So just an idea beyond advancing equity and reducing VMT. And then to the next part that Aria was just asking about, what are the local goals and how have they been measured? The local goals vary, but measurement is the real challenge because, for example, reducing VMT, usually we use surveys and we ask people, what is your normal mode of transportation before you get the e-bike, and then how has that changed? Better studies will actually have, measure people's travel before and during or after they receive the incentive, but that's pretty costly. And VMT reduction is always, for an e-bike, is always going to be based on some kind of survey response. Like for CVRP, the assumption is, you get an EV and you've replaced you've replaced a conventional vehicle with EV, and voila, those are clean miles. But with an e-bike, and I'm not saying that's the right assumption, because there's some major issues with that assumption too. You could increase your driving, you could decrease your driving, and so we really should have had, and we should have better evaluations of EV incentives as well. But with bicycling, the real big issue is that a lot of the bicycling isn't car replacing. And how do you measure that? You either trust survey responses, or you do an in-depth before and after study. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dylan. All right, next speaker will be David. David, I am unmuting your line. Please remember to state your name and affiliation.
Hello, this is Dave Frisbee, Planning and Air Monitoring Manager with the Monterey Bay Air Resources District. We are currently about to launch a e-bike incentive program this week. And we've run across a few questions that I think is rather pertinent to what you're trying to do. I like the last commenter's comments about having good surveys, because when this first came up, we really have no idea on how much VMT this is going to reduce, if any at all. So you really need to have good before and after surveys, but we're just going to go with a pilot program at this point. We're not sure what the value is right now, but we're going to give it a shot. So we set aside $50,000 to fund a $1,000 incentive for low-income applicants. So the challenges come in, one, determining if that's actually going to replace vehicle trips, or perhaps it might even reduce the demand on transit, so that it actually might have a negative impact on our local transit. So these are all questions that we have moving forward. Some of the challenges also are what's going to prevent the applicant from returning the bicycle to the shop? How would we know? What if they sell the bike immediately? How do we know that that's not going to happen? What if it's lost or stolen? How long do the applicants keep the bikes? Are the applicants going to just purchase the bicycle and leave it in their garage, if they even have a garage? Where are they going to park it if they live in an MUD? So these are a lot of questions that we have. We're not sure how it's going to go, but I think it's worth considering as you move forward with this program. What's the real benefit of it, and how can you best apply the incentives to get VMT reduction? What else? That kind of gives you an idea of what we've been looking at. Also, a couple other things. What's the incentive amount going to be, and how is it really going to incentivize somebody to purchase an electric bike? And then what range of prices are we looking at for the bicycles, and what class of bicycle are you looking at? Class 1, 2, or 3? Are you going to allow people to buy just a cheap e-bike they get from Costco or from a box store? Are you going to allow them to buy online? So there's many challenges to this that you need to consider as you move forward.
Thanks, David. Those are all things that we have discussed internally, and then a little bit at the first work group. There's just so much I can cover. There's just so much I can comment on. I think for your last comment about, where people are going to be able to actually buy the bicycles, that's something that we're still trying to decide. At the first work group, we put forward maybe just only allowing them to buy it from a local bike shop, but we also recognize that in rural communities and other communities where there isn't bike infrastructure, which sometimes translates to no bike shops, that's not something that's feasible. And, you know, having access to bicycle service is important. And in those communities, there isn't service because they don't have a bike shop. And so these are all things that we are considering, we're thinking about. We want to make sure that people who are participating in this program do, you know, are going to buy a bike and then 3 months later it's not going to die. So we may have, you know, there's comments about having some sort of warranty requirement on the bike. That this is what was discussed at the last work group. So everything is up in the air. We're still trying to navigate this. This is still at the very beginning process. Very beginning stages of this process, and you know we're learning. We're still learning about it. So thank you so much for your comments.
Sure. Good luck.
Thanks.
All right, our next speaker will be George. George, I have unmuted your line. Just a note that you may have to also unmute on your end. Oh, looks like you're good.
Thank you so much. I am really excited about what you're doing with the e-bikes. I also have noticed in Ventura here, by the way, I'm George Nagles from Balance to Thrive and Cal State Channel Islands. I have noticed that we have class 1 bike paths along the coast in the coastal trail and also within the city, and we just love those. The challenge, of course, is that some cyclists want to go rather fast, and some cyclists might just be learning to ride a bike. The e-bikes will generally be traveling pretty fast. And one thing we've observed here, sadly, is we have pedestrians that are afraid of the rapid cyclists, even not e-bikes, but you know, the long range road bikes, you know, and groups of people. And so they have chosen to walk on the railroad right of way instead of the bike path. And that has led to at least one death I'm aware of from someone being hit by the train. And it's compounded in complexity by the ocean erosion. So I think it's important to consider perhaps GPS tracking for the e-bikes that you help fund. And so that you can understand, are they using the class 1? How fast are they going? And or are they using the roads along with the cars? Also, there's an argument that we're very interested in here in Ventura is if we allow more bike transportation, does that keep the dollar spending more local? For example, if people live in Ventura and have an e-bike that they go shopping with, are they going to shop inside of the Ventura city limits and stimulate our local economy more than they would if they have their car, where they might drive all the way to Oxnard or some of the other communities, and then we lose those tax dollars? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I'm not hearing anything back.
Sorry. I'm like nodding my head. I'm like, yes, no, that absolutely makes sense. No, that totally makes sense, and it's something that we need to think about. I'm not sure if you need. Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah. So just a final thought. I think e-bikes are a wonderful idea. The whole question is, where do they go? Do they have the right to be on the road, and are motorists going to respect that right? We know they have the right to be there. They don't have the right to be on the, say, the 101 freeway, for example. So then where we have coastal erosion happening, we have a lot of competition for basically space. And it's wonderful that we have so many cyclists using the coastal trail, but the reality is the pedestrian pathways are being removed by the ocean, particularly at high tide. And there's this safety question. You know, I'm sure everyone would be sad to find that we have a big increase in bicycle pedestrian collisions related to e-bikes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Those are all questions that we're asking ourselves internally, and at these public work groups. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker will be Tom. Tom, I am unmuting your line.
Thank you. Tom Lentz, e-bike project coordinator for Walk Bike Berkeley. I want to pick up on George's comment on e-bikes potentially promoting local spending. I think it's an interesting challenge actually trying to get metrics on VMT, because there's a phenomenon of which I have a lot of anecdotal evidence, though not study evidence yet, that I hope that Dylan and those who are doing good studies like him will pick up on, which is a phenomenon of that's related to George's observation about bicyclists doing more local spending. And that's that what I found is that when people get an e-bike, particularly, it opens up options for them for getting around on bicycle that they didn't have before, because of the challenges of pedal bicycling, of pedal only bicycling, and that changes their perspective on both on commerce, on shopping and on recreation, in some pretty substantial ways. It gets people looking more at what's available rather than just the default of driving out to the mall or the big box, whatever. That it allows people to to rethink their old patterns, and so the miles that they may ride on the e-bike may significantly underestimate the miles that they're replacing, by that would have been to farther distances for entertainment, for dining, for shopping, and other recreational activities. So something to consider. Well, I don't have data on it, just anecdotal, but I've seen that phenomenon in a lot of people who try an e-bike.
Thanks, Tom. I'm like in the process of almost sneezing, so if I sneeze, apologize. Thank you so much. That's as I said, it's something that we're thinking about. It's something that we need to look more into. But thank you.
While Andrea is working on getting the next line open, I'm going to address a question in the question and answer box from Julian Query, representing the City of Encinitas Sustainability and Infrastructure Department. The question is, how is equity being defined in the context of this project? That's a real great question, Julian. For our projects, the way that equity has typically been defined is by following the guidance that we've gotten from the legislature through various bills, Senate Bill 535, using our CalEnviro screen. And so we look at dollars that we place in disadvantaged communities as defined by CalEnviro screen. We also look at dollars that are placed based on low-income communities and low-income households. And so when we are talking equity right now, those are the typical metrics that the majority of our projects look at for how equity is defined. And we fully recognize that equity is bigger than that, right? Like we're talking about everything from communities of color, priority populations. There are lots of different terms that we could use, but specifically for measurement purposes, just to be clear, like those are the things that we would look at is dollars spent within disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households. And so income generally is that measure of equity for us.
I do want to also expand on what Lisa said. We're also like in this context too, though, we are also looking at rural communities and underserved communities that may not have as much access to bike infrastructure. So really trying to make this program accessible to communities that are typically underserved when it comes to biking. Thanks, Lisa.
All right. So our next raised hand is Jonathan. Jonathan, I'm unmuting your line.
Jonathan Changus again with the Center for Sustainable Energy, and I just wanted to chime in with a lot of strong support for previous comments, I believe from both Davis and Imbard about the role of evaluation, both pre-purchase and post-purchase, and really informing kind of iterative design. We're just at the beginning process of really trying to get into the space of trying to encourage e-bike adoption. And this is where a robust evaluation process can really help inform. We're going to need that surveying. We're going to need community and customer feedback to understand what is potentially changing to really make a meaningful, conclusions about impacts. So just wanted to get on board with saying like that's really important. We're going to learn a lot if we ask the questions right. We've seen that time and again in programs like CVRP where there's been a robust evaluation rubric in place for some time now, and just wanted to go on board with saying like that's going to really help us understand what impact is the program having and to adjust along the way in kind of an iterative design process. So really appreciate those comments and strongly support them.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Our next speaker will be Erica. Erica, I am unmuting your line.
Hi, my name is Erica Hennen. I am from UC Irvine. I just wanted to comment a bit more about this safety aspect of this. I live near Laguna Beach, where there's a lot of young kids, teenagers who have e-bikes right now, which has been great for the community and reducing the amount of cars, but the safety aspect is still so important. I think that I kind of saw on your previous comments that having, for example, a bike helmet, if you completed a training, I think it should be something where you get you get a bike helmet, potentially even a lock, maybe instead of a full cash rebate. So then the concerns of people returning bikes or doing something different and keeping that rebate, it could be more of like a package that will help kind of establish and enhance their biking experience. Also kind of just as an opportunity to use this money. The other thing is, I don't know if eventually in the future, I know, for example, with motorcycles and scooters and things like that, we have levels of licensing, right? If your scooter isn't powered high enough, you don't have to get a motorcycle license. Once you get to a certain level, you do. If there's something like that potentially going to be happening with e-bikes in the future. And it also, bicycle registration, I think should be an important aspect of this. So that way we can keep track of the bikes. I think there is like a nationwide bike registration program. There's a lot of county ones, city ones, but I think having bike registration being a requirement should also be kind of reflective in this.
Thanks, Erica.
Our next speaker will be Kirsten. Kirsten, I'm unmuting your line.
Good morning. This is Kirsten Riker from 511 Contra Costa, and we rolled out an e-bike rebate program about a year ago. And so far we've given out close to 500 rebates. And I just wanted to say that one of the goals our program had was to increase mode awareness of e-bikes. So while everybody here on the phone is of course well aware of electric mobility, many people are not. So, anecdotally, when we were creating the program, we knew that, just word of mouth about e-bikes was a pretty powerful motivator for behavior change. And so sure enough, we set out with this goal of creating 500 e-bike ambassadors in our county. And through our follow-up survey data, we are finding that, yes, people are asking, we ask our rebate recipients, who's asked you about your e-bike? And close to 100% have said neighbors, friends, strangers, coworkers, family members. So while our rebate amount is somewhat lower than some of the other programs out there, it's only $150 or $300 for low-income residents. We're finding that our $150 is basically a marketing budget, and it's and we're seeing applicants, from, I look at the applications myself, and I'm seeing neighbors, on the same street are applying. So people are really talking about it. So just getting people to know about e-bikes and reaching a much wider audience than the typical bike rider is a good goal. I feel like once you try an e-bike, assuming you can afford one, you're going to want one. So just getting people out there knowing about the possibility of what these bikes can do, as opposed to just riding a regular bike, I think you're going to reach a much wider audience. And eventually, playing for the long game, creating vehicle reduction. And if one of the goals is VMT reduction, I think you do have to include class 3 bikes, because if you're trying to tell people to give up their car, you got to make it as close as possible to the convenience and speed of getting there by vehicle. So those are my points. Thank you.
That's really great, Kirsten. Appreciate the feedback. I think we've heard from a few folks today that either have run or starting up their own projects. And I think it'd be really great for those of you that are running or have run or are planning to run a project. I'd love to have, I think it'd be great if we could set up a kind of specific work group for those of you that are willing to share your lessons learned and what the rules are for your project. Again, as Aria has said, we're at the very beginning stages of developing this program. We know we have a lot to do. There are a lot of different considerations that we need to make, everything from the goals that we're starting with today to the vehicles and how we support local communities and safety and storage and charging and all of that. And I think it'd be really great, these perspectives within this hearing are really helpful, but I think to even just have like a back and forth dialogue with those of you that run these programs specifically, if you're interested in doing that, I think it'd be really great to have that type of a work group set up. We'd love to learn from what you're doing and find the best way to implement these dollars. So if you're open to it, please feel free, shoot Aria a note and we can set something up along those lines. And my hope is that it's something that you all that are running the programs can benefit from, as well as us, and again, taking away those lessons learned. And Kirsten, I think too, the concept that you had for your primary goal of kind of getting the word out there, did this really spur, more thought around an e-bike? I hadn't thought about going in that direction. And I think that is a very interesting idea for kind of taking a step back and being more basic about the technology as a whole. We've typically ran electric vehicle, car programs, very different beast. And so we really are, I think, very early with this type of an incentive, at least from a state perspective. And so that's an interesting idea as well. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. So moving on to our next speaker, Colin. And Colin, I'm unmuting your line.
Okay, hello. My name is Colin Fisk. I am with the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. We're located in Humboldt County. And so a couple of different things. I think there's a lot to say on the infrastructure issue, but I do think that it's so variable from region to region and town to town, and even neighborhood to neighborhood. And one thing I wanted to point out was that up here on the North Coast in Caltrans District 1, bikes and therefore e-bikes are actually allowed on all state highways. And that's because they're often the only way between communities. And so they already are being used in that way. And I think particularly in more rural areas, again, I don't have hard data on this, but anecdotally, e-bikes really do seem to empower people to take some of those car trips and transfer them to active transportation. I do want to support the idea of having really good before and after data collection so that we can present hard data on the impacts. But I do think that, especially if it's in any way means tested, that I would suggest it should be optional rather than required, because, you know, folks who receive various forms of government assistance often are subject to a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. And I think we don't want to deter people from participating in this because of paperwork, basically. And I think you'll find, you know, enough people who would opt into something like that. As far as a before kind of a data collection and maybe something that would actually help people figure out how to replace car trips, I think it would be an interesting idea to have some sort of maybe automated questionnaire that asks people about their use cases, and then could provide a range of suggestions for, you know, types of e-bikes that are available, maybe even where they could purchase them, or, you know, I know you have to be careful about directing people to certain companies and things like that, but to provide that sort of education component at the beginning that gets people thinking about a mode shift rather than maybe just recreational use case. And then the final thing I want to raise is that I think storage is just really important. We hear in some low-income communities, folks that live in apartments in particular, that you know, they don't even have a place to store a regular bike for long periods of time, and often they're stolen, and then they don't have money to replace them. And I think that problem becomes even more acute with more expensive e-bikes. And so I know this isn't focused on infrastructure, but I think that's a consideration if you're looking at potentially, you know, a pertinent infrastructure, minor things. I don't know exactly how to work that in there, but I know that can be a big issue. So thanks.
Thanks, Colin.
There are no additional raised hands at this time.
All right. And are there any questions in the Q&A box, Lisa, that we want to answer live?
Well, actually, you know, I was just responding to one right now, but we can actually cover, it'd be good for you to cover as a reminder for folks too. Can you walk through our timeline for developing the project again so folks know what we're looking at?
Yeah, so we are SB 129, which is the budget bill that that established this program, has said that the project itself needs to be established by July 1st, 2022. So our project timeline is that we are going to continue doing work groups. So I hope to have another work group at some point between October, but not like obviously the first week of October because it's the end of September right now, but between October and the end of the year. And our goal is to have our solicitation released at the beginning of 2022 and have the grant signed and have a grantee in place by July 1st, 2022 with a program launch with like an actual project launch. People can go and get incentives for e-bikes sometime in mid to late 2022 that's our project timeline. And we are going to the board. I'm going to sort of begin to wrap up because this is where I would say all this. We're going to the board in November of 2021. So we're going to the board in 2 months with the low carbon transportation funding plan. And that's where the board will approve the $10 million and the establishment of this project. And as I said, we'll have another work group before releasing the solicitation. We may also, as Lisa mentioned or suggested, have an additional work group on top of that with project administrators to discuss how they're running their projects and all of the specifications and requirements for their project. With that, If there are any other questions or raised hands, please let me know. Other than that, the end of the work group.
So we did get a question from Angela Herring Jackson, a transportation advocate in Sacramento. And her suggestion is for, and I'm flagging this for others because I know that we've been asked before about what we provide for content after these work groups. So the request here specifically is for us to document the questions and suggestions that were made and provide answers to them before our next working groups. So the way that this process typically works is, you know, we have these various work groups to kind of roll up our sleeves. You know, pre-pandemic, we would have these in a small room in our building, invite the public to participate, have a call-in line for those that can't come in person, and talk about these issues. It's an opportunity for us to roll up our sleeves and learn from everybody out there that has ideas and perspectives about this. And then we go back and take that and think about what the right approach is to implementation. And so we do not typically provide written responses to the questions and the comments that come from these work group processes. And given the amount, we did not receive any new positions with this funding. And so we've had to kind of move resources around, and I've got Aria on multiple projects, but this is her primary. So Aria's job is to take all of this great information back and develop it into a program. And what we do is we will, along the way, provide you with where we are in our progress and the types of things that we're considering. And so today's progress from our last work group is, we heard a lot about needing to have those goals before we really defined what the implementation of the project was going to look like. And we heard that loud and clear a couple weeks ago. And so we wanted to really focus today's discussion on those foundational goals and get your feedback there. From that, we've got, again, great feedback from the last work group, great feedback from this work group as well. And I can see, I think that there'll be more to come. We will take that feedback. Aria will continue, and myself and our other staff on the team will continue to do research, try to understand this particular mode of transportation the best, what communities need the best, how we're going to implement this the best. Again, we'd love to learn from those of you that have intimate experience in running these types of programs. And then we'll put together draft proposal, and we'll put that out for folks to comment on before we do our solicitation. So we'll put together kind of a scope of work of what we expect the administrator to do for us. And we'll also put together kind of an outline of what we expect the program to look like. And we'll put that out for public consumption. We'll be looking to your feedback on the things that we've identified, the scope by which we think that the money should cover. Again, based on all the great feedback that we've gotten from you guys through these particular work group processes. And then when we put out our solicitation, that doesn't mean we're done. What that means is that at that point, we've identified what we know we need help with and what we expect the administrator to help do in supporting us. Once we have an administrator in place, we'll continue to define and refine and define the parameters of the program, because we will have, there's so many components, as most of you guys have already identified, that we need to think about. It's not just about the bikes themselves, it's about the storage and the safety. And there's so many different components within each of those things. So there's a lot for us to be able to kind of scope out, and also figure out, if a consumer participates, what do we need to collect from a consumer, right? There's so much work that goes into these projects. So just know you're going to be with us on a very long journey over the next year as this is developed. But again, we won't be providing written responses back after each one of these. What will come back to you are those proposals as we develop them from everything that you guys hear. And then again, as we started out at the beginning of this work group, this is the first time we are recording. I hope that it's been set up properly in Zoom. And if it wasn't, I apologize, because I'm the one who set it up. If it's set up well, we do hope to post the recording. And so folks can go back and listen to this conversation, what the expectations are, what the prior questions are that have been answered. And again, we aim to have an open and consistent dialogue with all of our stakeholders on this. So feel free to reach out at any point. We're happy to meet with folks offline. And again, we'll check in with you, the public, as often as we can, and we have new information for us to talk about. with that, it looks like we've got some more hands raised and some more questions that have come in the box. So Andrea, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right. So our first raised hand is Marissa. Marissa, I'm unmuting your line.
Hi, Lisa and Aria. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I'll be very brief. I'm Marissa Mangan, planner here at the San Diego Association of Governments, an MPO here in California. Just want to strongly support integrating some sort of data collection effort that's both reasonable but also meaningful. A before and after survey, for example, can be completed by those who are incentivized, so it's just not the rebate all by itself, and wanted to kind of pose the idea of partnering with some academic research entity that could adapt all kinds of best practices from local incentive programs that have already been deployed, like in our region, but also learning from survey tools and methods that MPOs have put in use just for other travel behavior surveys, and trying to kind of get a concise but meaningful tool that could not be a barrier to adoption or participation in the incentive program, but be some kind of reasonable level of requirement for the incentive. And just as a side note, the local e-bike incentive program here in San Diego that I sent you some information about, Pedal Ahead, has set at least an initial metric or a goal of having participants show that they're biking on average kind of 5 miles per day and trying to help reduce VMT, impact mode shift, and replace vehicle use. So it could be something to consider in terms of an average miles.
Thanks, Megan. Oh, sorry, I was looking at your last name. Thanks, Marissa. Sorry.
All right, there are no additional raised hands at this time.
With that, I see Lisa is typing an answer to a question in the Q&A box. But I just wanted to say I dropped my email in the chat, and for those of you who have emailed me, you know that I am responsive, and for those of you who haven't emailed me, I am very responsive to emails. So please feel free to email me. If you want to set up a time to meet, I'm more than happy to do that. Just, you know, we're learning all about this, and you guys know, you know what's going on out there, especially those that are, you know, leading e-bike incentive programs regionally. So please reach out to me. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending this work group, and we will post the next work group on our website. And thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.